The second the ballroom doors swung open and 600 pairs of eyes turned toward me, I felt something inside me go completely still. The Crestview Ballroom was glowing beneath massive crystal chandeliers. Politicians, bankers, business owners, and some of the wealthiest families in Charleston filled the room. Waiters moved between tables carrying champagne and silver trays. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Everything looked perfect, but perfection is often where the ugliest things hide. My name is Tessa Langford. I am 31 years old, and on the night of the Founders Gala, my husband publicly humiliated me in front of 600 people. The sound of his hand striking my face echoed through the room like a gunshot. For one frozen second, nobody moved. The music stopped. Conversations died. Champagne glasses remained suspended in the air. Then came the whispers. And worse than the whispers, a few people laughed. My lips split instantly. I tasted blood. Yet somehow the physical pain didn't matter, because the emotional pain had been building for years. As I stood there, staring at the shocked faces around me, my eyes found my mother-in-law, Eleanor Whitmore. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't angry. She was smiling. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her champagne glass as if she were celebrating a victory she had spent years preparing for. And at that moment, only one thought entered my mind. None of you know who my mother is. None of you know what happens when a woman like my mother decides she has finally had enough. But to understand how that night happened, you have to go back 4 years. Back to the day I met Camden Whitmore. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. Our apartment had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen so small that 2 people couldn't stand inside it comfortably at the same time. The heating system rattled every winter. The roof leaked during heavy rain. Money was always tight. But despite everything, I never felt poor, because my mother refused to let poverty become our identity. Marisol Langford came to America from Bogota when she was 24 years old. She arrived with broken English, $300, and more determination than anyone I have ever met. During the day, she worked as a court interpreter. At night, she studied law. She slept 4 hours a night for years. Sometimes I woke up at 2 in the morning and found her reading legal textbooks at the kitchen table. She would smile and tell me everything was fine. Only later did I realize how much she sacrificed. Whenever I cried about school problems, friendships, or anything else, she always repeated the same sentence. Don't cry without a plan. At the time, I hated hearing it, but she never changed her answer. Tears help identify the problem, she would say. They do not solve it. Years later, those words would save my life. I met Camden during a hospital fundraiser where I worked in administration. The moment he introduced himself, people noticed him. He was handsome, confident, charismatic, the type of man who could walk into a crowded room and instantly become the center of attention. But when he spoke to me, he made me feel like I was the only person there. For months he seemed perfect. He remembered small details. He brought coffee to my office. He sent good morning messages every day. He listened when I talked, or at least I thought he listened. 6 months later, he proposed. I said yes without hesitation. I truly believed I had found my future. I truly believed I had found love. The problems began the moment his family entered the picture, especially Eleanor Whitmore. The first dinner at her estate felt like walking into a museum. Everything was expensive. Everything was polished. Everything was designed to impress. During dinner, Eleanor examined me carefully from across the table. Then she smiled. The kind of smile that looked warm from a distance but felt cold up close. Your mother still works as an interpreter? She asked. I nodded proudly. Yes. How admirable. She sipped her wine. Some people are born to survive. The table grew quiet. Then she added, others are born to lead. Nobody challenged her. Nobody objected. Camden simply looked uncomfortable, and I laughed awkwardly because I didn't yet understand what was happening. Looking back, that was my first warning. I should have listened. I didn't, as I was in love, and love has a dangerous habit of making excuses for people who don't deserve them. Over the following months, wedding planning became a battlefield disguised as a celebration. Every decision somehow ended up in Eleanor's hands. She chose the venue. She chose the flowers. She chose the guest list. She even chose the color palette. When my mother suggested including one traditional Colombian family recipe in the reception menu, Eleanor immediately rejected it. Our guests wouldn't appreciate that kind of food. She smiled while saying it, as though she were doing us a favor. My mother remained calm. Afterward, she pulled me aside. Watch how people behave when they think they don't need your approval. I remember nodding, but I still believed everything would improve after the wedding. I was wrong, very wrong, because Eleanor Whitmore wasn't preparing to welcome me into her family. She was preparing to remind me that I would never belong there. And unfortunately, the man I loved was about to let it happen. The wedding was beautiful. At least that was what everyone said. The photographs looked perfect. The flowers were perfect. The venue was perfect. The guests smiled. The music played exactly as planned. And from the outside, Camden and I looked like the perfect couple beginning the perfect life. But perfection is often just a carefully decorated lie. The morning after our honeymoon, reality began to show itself. At first, the insults were small. So small that if I complained, I sounded overly sensitive. Eleanor was an expert at that. She never openly attacked me. Instead, she wrapped every insult in politeness. Every criticism arrived disguised as advice. Every humiliation came hidden behind a smile. One evening during a family dinner, she looked at my dress and tilted her head. My dear, bright colors don't suit everyone. The room became quiet. Vanessa smirked. Camden continued eating. I forced myself to smile. Another time, I was discussing a project from work when Eleanor interrupted me. That's wonderful, Tessa. Then she turned toward another guest. Although leadership positions require a very different skill set, everyone understood what she meant. Nobody said anything. I learned quickly that silence was the Whitmore family's favorite weapon. Weeks turned into months. The comments became more frequent, more personal, more deliberate. Sometimes Eleanor attacked my education, sometimes my background, sometimes my mother's immigrant history. Each insult landed exactly where it would hurt most. And every single time Camden remained silent. At first I made excuses for him. Maybe he didn't notice. Maybe he felt uncomfortable. Maybe he didn't know how to respond. But eventually I accepted the truth. He noticed everything. He simply chose not to defend me. That realization hurt more than anything Eleanor ever said. The worst moment came during Thanksgiving. It had always been my favorite holiday. Growing up, my mother made arepas every year. It was a tradition, a connection to family, a reminder of where we came from. That year I woke up early and spent hours preparing them exactly the way my mother taught me. When we arrived at the Whitmore estate, I carried the tray proudly. For a brief moment I felt hopeful. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe things were finally improving. I couldn't have been more wrong. As dinner preparations began, Eleanor lifted the lid from the tray. She stared at the food for several seconds. Then she looked around the room. "This doesn't belong on our table." The words landed like a slap. Vanessa burst out laughing. A few relatives smiled. Others looked away. Camden lowered his eyes. Nobody defended me. Nobody objected. Nobody even pretended it was rude. Slowly, I picked up the tray. My face burned with embarrassment. My hands shook. But I refused to cry. Not there. Not in front of them. I carried the food back to my car and sat alone in the driver's seat. Outside, laughter and conversation continued inside the mansion. Nobody came looking for me. Nobody checked whether I was okay. For nearly an hour I sat there staring through the windshield. Then I heard my mother's voice in my head. "Don't cry without a plan." The words felt different now. Stronger. More important. I wiped my eyes, started the engine, and drove home. That night changed everything. For the first time, I stopped hoping the Whitmores would accept me. Instead, I started preparing for the possibility that one day I might need to protect myself from them. When I arrived home, I opened my laptop. I created a hidden folder. Then I typed 2 words. Insurance. I didn't fully understand why I was doing it. Not yet. But something deep inside me knew I would need it someday. Whenever something happened afterward, I documented it. Emails, messages, comments, screenshots, anything that felt important. Everything went into the folder. Weeks later, another major crack appeared in my marriage. Camden found a house he loved. It was located in Greystone Heights, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. 5 bedrooms, a massive kitchen, beautiful landscaping, perfect schools nearby. The house cost more money than I could imagine spending. One evening he sat beside me scrolling through pictures. Mom says she can help with the down payment. There it was again. Mom. Every important decision seemed to begin with that word. I took a deep breath. We have savings. We could buy something smaller. He looked genuinely confused. Why would we do that? Because I want something that's ours. He stared at me as if I had spoken another language. The next morning, Eleanor had already contacted real estate agents. Within days, she was negotiating contracts. Within weeks, she was helping structure the mortgage. Then came the final surprise. She insisted on being listed as co-owner. For protection, she claimed. Family protection. Even Camden agreed. When I signed those documents, something inside me felt uneasy. That house would never truly belong to us. Because Eleanor had made sure of that. A few days later, I opened a separate savings account. I didn't tell Camden. I started putting money away every month. Building security. Building independence. Building options. Because slowly I was learning a painful lesson. In the Whitmore family, money was never a gift. Money was control. And Eleanor controlled everything. Or at least she thought she did. What none of them realized was that while they were busy underestimating me, I was quietly paying attention, observing, recording, preparing. And very soon I would discover something that would change everything. Something hidden behind the polished image of the Whitmore family. Something far more dangerous than cruel jokes and social humiliation. Something worth thousands of dollars. And eventually, something worth destroying an entire family over. The second year of my marriage began with distance. Not physical distance. Emotional distance. Camden and I still lived in the same house. We still ate dinner together. We still attended family events. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. But something had changed. Every time Eleanor insulted me and Camden stayed silent, a small piece of my trust disappeared. Every family gathering felt less like a celebration and more like a test I was destined to fail. No matter what I did, it was never enough. If I spoke too much, I was trying too hard. If I stayed quiet, I was antisocial. If I dressed elegantly, I was seeking attention. If I dressed simply, I lacked sophistication. The rules constantly changed because the goal was never fairness. The goal was humiliation. And I was finally beginning to understand that. One Saturday evening, I was standing in the kitchen preparing dinner when Camden's phone started vibrating on the counter. One notification, then another, then another. Normally I ignored his phone. I respected privacy, but something caught my attention. The name of the group chat, Real Whitmores. My stomach tightened immediately. The name alone felt wrong. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Camden was upstairs taking a shower. The phone continued vibrating. For several seconds I simply stared at it. Then I picked it up. I knew his password. It was his father's birthday. For a moment I hesitated. Part of me knew I shouldn't look. Another part of me knew I needed to. Slowly I unlocked the screen. And the moment I opened the chat, my world changed. The first thing I saw was a photograph of me. Vanessa had taken it during a family lunch. In the picture I was smiling while placing dishes on the table. Beneath it she had written, Looks like the housekeeper is trying to be glamorous today. Several laughing emojis followed. Then I saw Eleanor's response. At least she's useful for something. More laughter. More jokes. Then my eyes landed on Camden's reply. A laughing emoji. My husband. The man who promised to love and protect me. The man who stood beside me at the altar. The man I had defended countless times. He laughed too. I kept scrolling. And the deeper I went, the worse it became. There were comments about my clothes. Comments about my accent whenever I spoke Spanish with my mother. Comments about my upbringing. Comments about my family. One message from Eleanor made my hands tremble. A daughter of an immigrant never fully learned certain things. Underneath it, Camden had responded with a clapping emoji. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to process what I was reading. For years I had believed Camden was weak. I thought he was afraid of standing up to his mother. I thought he lacked courage. But now I understood the truth. He wasn't a victim. He was participating. Maybe not as aggressively as Eleanor and Vanessa, but he was still one of them. And somehow that hurt even more. Tears filled my eyes. For a brief moment I wanted to confront him immediately. I wanted to storm upstairs. I wanted answers. I wanted explanations. I wanted him to tell me it wasn't real. But then I heard my mother's voice. Don't cry without a plan. The anger disappeared. The sadness disappeared. Something colder replaced them. Something calmer. I began taking screenshots, one after another. Every insult, every joke, every cruel comment, every piece of evidence. 52 screenshots. 52 examples of exactly who they were when they believed nobody was watching. When I finished, I transferred everything to my laptop. Then I placed the files inside the folder. Insurance. For the first time, that folder truly had a purpose. Afterward, I put the phone back exactly where I found it. Minutes later, Camden walked into the kitchen. His hair was still wet from the shower. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and asked what I wanted for dinner. As if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't spent months laughing at me behind my back. I smiled back, and for the first time in my marriage I lied. I'm fine. The following months became easier in one way. The truth hurt, but at least I finally knew it. I stopped expecting loyalty. I stopped expecting protection. I stopped expecting kindness. And when expectations disappear, disappointment loses some of its power. Eleanor continued her games. At dinner, she found elegant ways to insult me. Tessa, dear, some women simply have a natural understanding of social etiquette. Or, success is admirable, but breeding is difficult to acquire. Every comment was carefully designed, cruel enough to hurt, polite enough to avoid criticism. Meanwhile, Vanessa behaved exactly like her mother. The two of them often exchanged knowing looks whenever I entered a room, like members of a private club, a club I would never join. One evening something unusual happened. I woke up around 2 in the morning. The house was dark, quiet. Then I heard movement downstairs. When I walked into the living room, I found Camden sitting alone on the couch. A half-empty bottle of whiskey rested on the table beside him. He was drunk, very drunk, and for the first time since our marriage began, he looked completely broken. He didn't notice me at first. His eyes were fixed on an old photograph, a picture of his father. When he finally looked up, tears were streaming down his face. He would have liked you. The words surprised me. What? My dad. His voice cracked. He would have treated you differently. For the next hour he talked about his father, about how much he missed him, about how Eleanor controlled everything after his death, about how different life used to be. That night I saw a version of Camden I hadn't seen in years. Not the obedient son, not the polished businessman, not Eleanor's shadow, just a damaged man grieving a loss he never recovered from. For a few hours I remembered why I fell in love with him. For a few hours I believed there was still hope. Then morning arrived. At exactly 6:30 Eleanor called. Camden answered immediately. Within minutes the vulnerable man from the night before vanished. His posture changed. His voice changed. His entire personality seemed to shift. By breakfast, he was back to being Eleanor's loyal son, and I finally accepted something painful. You cannot save someone who refuses to save themselves. A few months later, preparations began for the biggest event of the year, the Whitmore Foundation Mother's Day Charity Gala. More than 600 guests would attend. Business leaders, hospital executives, politicians, donors, media representatives. The event represented everything Eleanor valued most: power, status, influence. And although I didn't know it yet, that gala would become the beginning of the Whitmore family's downfall. Because while everyone else was focused on appearances, I was about to discover what they were hiding behind them. Preparations for the Mother's Day Charity Gala consumed nearly every hour of the following weeks. The Whitmore Foundation treated the event like the crown jewel of its public image. Every detail mattered. Every flower arrangement, every guest invitation, every speech, every photograph. And at the center of it all stood Eleanor Whitmore. She moved through meetings like a queen 00000000000, inspecting her kingdom. Point zero. People obeyed her without question. Employees rushed to satisfy her requests. Board members rarely challenged her opinions. Even donors seemed eager for her approval. Watching her, it was easy to understand how she had maintained control for so many years. She understood power. And more importantly, she understood how to make people fear losing it. Vanessa handled public relations. Camden worked with sponsors. And I was assigned tasks that nobody considered important: guest registration, name cards, seating arrangements, administrative support. The kind of work people noticed only when something went wrong. At first I felt insulted. Then I realized something important. Invisible people often see things everyone else misses. So I smiled. I accepted every assignment. And I paid attention. One afternoon I went to Eleanor's office to retrieve several folders related to the gala. She wasn't there. The office was empty. Normally I would have grabbed the files and left immediately. But something on her desk caught my eye. Several financial reports were spread across the surface. Numbers, budgets, donation summaries, expense sheets. Nothing unusual. At least not at first. Then one number made me pause. Total donations received: $410,000. I stared at the number, then checked the photograph I had taken earlier for planning purposes. Same amount, $320,000. Not $410,000. A difference of $90,000. $90,000. I felt a strange chill. Financial discrepancies happen. Clerical errors happen. But not usually at that scale. And certainly not in organizations handling charitable donations. I took another photograph, then quietly returned home. Most people would have ignored it. Most people would have assumed someone else would investigate. But I worked in administration. Numbers mattered. Details mattered. And inconsistencies bothered me. That night after Camden fell asleep, I opened my laptop. I began reviewing publicly available information about the foundation. Annual reports, tax filings, expense summaries, vendor payments. Hours passed. Slowly patterns began emerging. Certain expenses appeared repeatedly. Large expenses. Unusually large expenses. 2 company names appeared over and over. Palm Events and Floral. Legacy Sound Solutions. At first glance they looked legitimate. Event companies. Perfectly reasonable vendors for charity galas. But something felt wrong. The payments seemed excessive, far above industry averages. The following evening I decided to investigate further. I searched for both companies online. Nothing. No websites. No social media pages. No business reviews. No contact information. Nothing. That immediately raised concerns. Most legitimate companies leave some digital footprint. These had none. I searched commercial registration records. My heart began beating faster. Palm Events and Floral listed an address connected to an abandoned storefront. Legacy Sound Solutions was registered to a building that had been closed for years. I checked satellite images. Both locations appeared deserted. No active businesses. No employees. No operations. Nothing. I sat frozen in front of my computer. The pieces were beginning to fit together. And I didn't like the picture they created. Over the next several nights I dug deeper. Every document led to more questions. Every answer revealed another inconsistency. The 2 companies had received thousands of dollars from the Whitmore Foundation over multiple years. Payments for services that appeared impossible to verify. Invoices lacking detail. Expenses lacking documentation. The total amount connected to those transactions was nearly $90,000. Exactly the amount missing from the donation records. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair. My hands felt cold. There was a word for what I was seeing. Shell companies. Fake vendors. Potential financial fraud. I wasn't a criminal investigator. I wasn't a forensic accountant. But I knew enough to recognize warning signs. And these warning signs were screaming. For the next week I collected everything. Screenshots, documents, payment records, addresses, public filings, invoices, photographs. I organized the evidence carefully. Every file went into the insurance folder. The folder that had started as protection against emotional abuse was becoming something much larger, something far more dangerous. Finally, I prepared a detailed report outlining everything I had discovered. When I finished, I copied every file onto a USB drive. Then I did something that surprised even me. I mailed a duplicate copy to my mother, just in case. If something happened, if evidence disappeared, if someone tried to silence me, another copy would survive. 3 days later, I drove 2 hours to visit Marisol. The moment she opened the door, she knew something was wrong. Mothers always know. We sat together in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she had once studied law textbooks late into the night. I told her everything. The insults, the family group chat, Camden's betrayal, the missing money, the shell companies, the suspicious transactions. She listened quietly, without interrupting, without reacting, without offering advice. When I finally finished speaking, silence filled the room. Then she asked one question. Only one. Do you have proof? I nodded. Yes. She stared at me for several seconds, then slowly took a sip of coffee and smiled. Not a happy smile. Not a comforting smile. A dangerous smile. The smile of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion. Good, she said calmly. I waited. Then she delivered the sentence that changed everything. Now let them destroy themselves. For a moment I didn't understand. What? She set her coffee cup down. People like Eleanor believe they're untouchable. Her eyes never left mine. The worst thing you can do is warn them. A chill ran through me, because suddenly I understood exactly what she meant. If we exposed them too early, they'd hide the evidence. They'd create explanations. They'd prepare defenses. But if they continued believing they had won, they would make mistakes. Big mistakes. And the Mother's Day Gala was only 2 weeks away. The biggest public event of the year. The event where 600 influential people would be watching. The perfect stage. The perfect audience. And perhaps, the perfect downfall. 2 weeks before the Mother's Day charity gala, everything started falling into place. Not for Eleanor. Not for Vanessa. For me. The more I watched them, the more obvious their plan became. Every decision they made carried the same message. You don't belong here. You never did. And soon everyone will know it. One Monday morning I received the official seating chart for the gala. I opened the document and searched for my name. At first I thought there had been a mistake. Then I realized it wasn't a mistake at all. It was intentional. Camden would sit at the head table beside Eleanor and Vanessa. Major donors would occupy the front rows. Board members would sit near the stage. Politicians would be given premium tables. And me? Table 52. The very back of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a decorative column, near the service entrance. Far away from the family. Far away from the cameras. Far away from anyone important. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Then I picked up my phone and called Camden. He answered after several rings. Hey, why am I sitting at table 52? Silence. Then a sigh. Mom wanted immediate family near the stage. I felt my jaw tighten. I am immediate family. Another pause. Tessa, please don't turn this into an issue. An issue? That was his response. Not concern. Not outrage. Not support. Just another request for silence. I ended the call without another word. And for the first time I felt absolutely nothing. No sadness. No disappointment. No anger. Just clarity. The next day Vanessa assigned me another responsibility. You'll be greeting guests at the entrance. She smiled sweetly. You're good at smiling. The insult was hidden beneath polite words. As always, I smiled back. Of course. What Vanessa didn't realize was that she had just handed me access to something extremely valuable. The guest management database. The donor records. The thank you correspondence system. Information. And information was power. That evening I logged into the system. The password had been sent directly to my email. Vanessa never imagined I would use it for anything beyond administrative work. Why would she? After all, in her mind I was just the outsider. The harmless wife. The woman nobody respected. I spent hours reviewing records. Most of them appeared normal. Donor lists. Contact information. Event expenses. Nothing unusual. Then I discovered something interesting. Several large donations listed in internal reports never appeared in public summaries. I cross-referenced dates, compared spreadsheets, checked financial records. The discrepancy remained. Again and again. Thousands of dollars. Missing. Hidden. Moved. The evidence continued growing. And so did the insurance folder. Every screenshot. Every invoice. Every suspicious transfer. Every questionable payment. By now the folder had become a weapon. One that could destroy everything Eleanor had spent decades building. 5 days before the gala, something happened that removed any remaining doubt about their intentions. It was nearly midnight. I had gone downstairs for a glass of water. The house was quiet. As I walked past the pantry, I heard voices. The door wasn't fully closed. I recognized them immediately. Vanessa and Eleanor. I stopped moving. "Mom, the speech needs to be strong." Vanessa sounded excited, almost eager. "I want everyone to understand exactly who Tessa is." A small laugh came from Eleanor. The sound made my stomach turn. "Don't worry. I've been preparing it for weeks." My heartbeat quickened. Weeks. They had been planning something for weeks. Vanessa laughed. "Camden will support you. As always." Another laugh. "Of course he will." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "When she loses control in front of everyone, they'll finally understand she doesn't belong in this family." I froze. My entire body went cold. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This wasn't another insult. This was a carefully planned public humiliation. The seating chart, the speech, the jokes, the isolation, everything connected. Everything had been designed for one purpose: to break me. In front of 600 people. They wanted me to cry. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to embarrass myself. And then they wanted everyone to watch. I quietly walked away before they could hear me. Back inside my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed for nearly an hour. Thinking, processing, planning. Years earlier, that discovery would have destroyed me. Not anymore. Now I had something stronger than emotion. Evidence. The next morning I called my mother. She listened carefully. Then she asked one question. "Are you ready?" I knew exactly what she meant. I looked at the insurance folder, at the files, the screenshots, the documents, the financial records, the shell companies, the proof, and finally I answered, "Yes." 3 nights before the gala, the Whitmore family hosted a private dinner at their estate. Everyone acted normal, too normal. The atmosphere felt artificial, like actors preparing for a performance. Vanessa talked about decorations. Camden discussed donors. Eleanor sipped wine. Then, as always, she found a way to attack. "Is Marisol still living in that little apartment?" she asked casually. I looked up. "My mother is very happy where she lives." Eleanor smiled. "Some people become comfortable with small lives." Vanessa immediately joined in. "Not everyone is meant for more." The two exchanged amused glances. I remained silent. Then Vanessa delivered the final blow. The same sentence she'd repeated for years. "You'll never be a real Whitmore." The room became quiet. I waited. I waited for Camden. For once. Just once. I wanted him to say something. Anything. But he didn't. He simply continued eating. As though the conversation didn't exist. As though his wife wasn't sitting beside him. As though none of it mattered. That was the moment my marriage ended. Not legally. Not publicly. But emotionally. Completely. I stood from the table. Nobody stopped me. Nobody cared. Inside the bathroom, I locked the door. My hands were shaking. Not from sadness. From certainty. I reached into my purse and removed a small handkerchief. My mother's name was embroidered into the corner. Marisol. A wedding gift she had given me years earlier. For several minutes I stared at it. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a message. Just 4 words. "I'm ready for tomorrow." Her response arrived less than a minute later. "Good." That was all. No speech. No advice. No questions. Just one word. Good. Because she knew something the Whitmores didn't. The next night, while searching Camden's office for a phone charger, I opened one of his desk drawers. Inside sat an old yellow envelope. Dust covered the edges. It looked forgotten, ignored, hidden. Curious, I picked it up. The handwriting on the front made my breath catch. The envelope belonged to Camden's father, Richard Whitmore. And what I would discover inside that envelope would become the final piece of the puzzle, the final weapon, the final secret, and the reason the Whitmore family would never recover from what happened at the gala. Tomorrow night, 600 people would gather beneath the chandeliers. Eleanor believed she would destroy me. Vanessa believed she would humiliate me. Camden believed I would remain silent. None of them understood the truth. The trap they had spent years building was no longer mine. It was theirs. The Crestview ballroom had never looked more perfect. Crystal chandeliers bathed the hall in golden light. Hundreds of guests filled the tables, politicians, business leaders, wealthy donors, and journalists. Every seat had been carefully assigned, every detail meticulously controlled by Eleanor Whitmore. It was her night, her stage, her kingdom, and she believed nothing could go wrong. I stood near the entrance in a simple black dress, greeting guests with the same calm smile I had perfected over the years. Inside my purse, the USB drive was still there. The insurance folder existed in duplicate copies, safely backed up. And for the first time in years, I felt completely still. Not nervous, not afraid. Ready. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed slightly. The gala began. Eleanor stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. She looked flawless, powerful, untouchable. Tonight, she began, we celebrate the Whitmore Foundation's commitment to community, family, and legacy. Applause followed her every sentence. Camden sat at the main table beside her, clapping politely. Vanessa smiled like everything had already been won. And then Eleanor's gaze slowly shifted toward me. I knew this moment. She raised her glass slightly. Of course, she continued. No family is without challenges. A few polite laughs spread through the hall. Camden lowered his eyes. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, already enjoying what was coming. Eleanor continued. Sometimes we welcome people into our family who do not understand what it means to belong. Her voice remained calm, elegant, controlled. But tonight is about truth. That word hung in the air. Truth. She turned fully toward me now. 600 guests followed her gaze. Some individuals mistake opportunity for entitlement, she said, and generosity for weakness. The hall went silent. This foundation has survived because we protect what matters. And sometimes that means removing what does not belong. That was it. The signal. Vanessa stood up slowly from her seat and walked toward the stage with a prepared speech in her hand. This was the moment they had planned. Public humiliation. A controlled collapse. My downfall in front of everyone. Vanessa took the microphone. She smiled sweetly at the audience. And now, she said, I think it's time we acknowledge someone who has struggled to adapt to our family values. A few nervous laughs. Camden didn't move, didn't speak, didn't look at me. Vanessa turned toward me. Tessa, she said softly, we appreciate your effort, but… Stop. My voice cut through the hall. Not loud, not emotional, just firm. The room froze. Even Eleanor blinked in surprise. I slowly walked forward, step by step, until I stood near the edge of the stage. 600 eyes followed me. I reached into my purse and pulled out the USB drive. Eleanor frowned. What are you doing? I didn't answer her. Instead, I looked at the audience. Before anyone says another word, I said, you should see something. A technician hesitated. I handed him the USB drive. He plugged it into the system. The first screen appeared behind Eleanor. Financial records. donation reports, internal spreadsheets. A murmur spread through the crowd. Eleanor's expression tightened. "What is this?" she demanded. I stepped closer to the microphone. "This is the Whitmore Foundation's real financial history." The room shifted. Phones came out. Whispers grew louder. I continued. "For the past several years, nearly $90,000 in donations have been misreported. But to understand how that night happened, you have to go back 4 years. Back to the day I met Camden Whitmore. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. Our apartment had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen so small that 2 people couldn't stand inside it comfortably at the same time. The heating system rattled every winter. The roof leaked during heavy rain. Money was always tight. But despite everything, I never felt poor. Because my mother refused to let poverty become our identity. Tessa Langford came to America from Bogota when she was 24 years old. She arrived with broken English, $300, and more determination than anyone I have ever met. During the day, she worked as a court interpreter. At night, she studied law. She slept 4 hours a night for years. Sometimes I woke up at 2 in the morning and found her reading legal textbooks at the kitchen table. She would smile and tell me everything was fine. Only later did I realize how much she sacrificed. Whenever I cried about school problems, friendships, or anything else, she always repeated the same sentence. "Don't cry without a plan." At the time, I hated hearing it, but she never changed her answer. "Tears help identify the problem," she would say. "They do not solve it." Years later, those words would save my life. I met Camden during a hospital fundraiser where I worked in administration. The moment he introduced himself, people noticed him. He was handsome, confident, charismatic, the type of man who could walk into a crowded room and instantly become the center of attention. But when he spoke to me, he made me feel like I was the only person there. For months he seemed perfect. He remembered small details. He brought coffee to my office. He sent good morning messages every day. He listened when I talked. Or at least I thought he listened. 6 months later he proposed. I said yes without hesitation. I truly believed I had found my future. I truly believed I had found love. Cameras flashed. Whispers became chaos. Eleanor looked around like a trapped animal. For the first time in her life, she had no control. No silence. No obedience. Only truth. Vanessa stepped back slowly. Camden stared at the floor. And I stood there completely calm. Eleanor's voice cracked. "You did this." She pointed at me. "You planned this." I met her eyes. "No," I said quietly. "You did." The officers moved forward. As they placed handcuffs on Eleanor Whitmore, the ballroom that once belonged to her fell into absolute silence. No applause. No laughter. Only reality. Camden finally looked at me, but I didn't look back. Because I was done waiting for him to become someone he was never going to be. Eleanor was escorted out past 600 silent witnesses. Vanessa followed speechless. And Camden stood alone in the center of everything he had once protected. The Whitmore name didn't fall that night because of me. It fell because of everything they thought they could hide forever. I walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Free. My phone vibrated once. A message from my mother. "Good job." I smiled. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving anymore. I felt like I was finally free.